Absolutely. Oh my goodness, that was so interesting. Thank you for sharing all of that. Really appreciate it. My colleague Tanarika is here. Tanarika, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt. But I do have some myself, Nate. The
Okay,
first
sure.
being um, the gut microbiome restoration trials, the one by Caltech, and possibly even capsules. Were you measuring like social behavior or like behavior with regards to certain neurally implicated disorders, or was it entirely just like diarrhea and other um, like physiological symptoms?
Yeah. So great question. When dealing with the gut, the first thing people typically look at are the things that are um, happening with the gut. So whether that's decreases in transit and motility or inflammation in the gut, these are often the first things in line. But yeah, the goal of a lot of the gut-brain axis research is indeed looking at how it changes behavior. So both in the study by Sarkis Mazmanian's group, as well as the different studies that we do here, we will use FMT as a way to measure the differences in behavior. So in their study, they did look at things like repetitive behaviors, as well as social behavior, if I remember right. And they saw some differences depending on which donor, whether it was a healthy control or autism spectrum disorder patient that the FMT came from.
So given that I have a follow-up, which is that we talked earlier about critical periods and how sort of early development is really important for, especially with the interaction between the microbiome and the brain. It was quite stark to see how like just the very like myelination patterns and connections of the different neurons is drastically altered early in life. So given that model, how do you think that it's possible that a restoration later in life could potentially cause or like help behavior to that extent?
Yeah, no, that's another really good question, and it's it's good to keep in mind that with that graph of showing the different critical windows, a lot of times we look at that more as places that if an insult were to arrive, that can affect behaviors that are associated with that timing of brain development. So when we're looking at different treatments, especially that of the microbiome, we might not be able to fix something if it occurs later in life. We due to where the critical window occurred. So I think the goal is to identify these different critical window areas, and if some sort of insult or trauma were to occur, to try to fix it then with the right types of medications and microbiota therapeutics. We can always try to return something later, but when it's gain or loss of function and something as critical as development, it can be very difficult to try to fix something that already kind of went down a different path. Does that kind of answer the question?
I think so. Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that. And so, um, yeah, I mean, Tanrika said that she isn't able to unmute, but definitely like really appreciates your talk. For our audience, who's mostly high schoolers, how do you think that, or how would you encourage them to like learn more about the field? Like, what are some good resources that they could look into if they were interested in the gut microbiome brain axis?
That's another very good question. So I'm always a fan of scientific publications being the first source you go to. However, I can also understand that coming out of high school, maybe picking up a scientific paper might look a little bit daunting. Sometimes it can be difficult to get your hands on them as well, whether they're behind paywalls or a variety of different things. One thing I could recommend is my principal investigator here, supervisor John Crine and Ted Dinan have actually wrote a book called The Psychobiotic Revolution. And in that they go through the different aspects of the microbiome and how it can affect the brain in a much more lay audience approach. So it could be a good reading to pick up. But yeah, there is a lot happening in the field, and kind of getting started on it can be difficult because there is so many different spots where information is being given all over the internet and news and stuff like that. And a lot of times it can be portrayed in perhaps not the most accurate fashion. So I would always recommend to try to go to the experts. And I for one, can say that that book, Psychobiotic Revolution, would be a good place to start.
Yeah, and this is like a very specific question, right? The gut microbiome brain axis. So how did you sort of cultivate that interest, and how did that take you to the other side of the world?
Yeah, no, that's another good question, because there aren't many New Mexicans here in Cork, Ireland, where we are. But yeah, so I went to University of New Mexico there in Albuquerque, and I was originally a biology major, and the whole time I was very interested in infectious disease and microbiology, and I actually started doing undergraduate research with my microbiology professor, Larry Barton, and he actually introduced me to a gastroenterologist, Henry Lin, who was working with the microbiome at the time, and looking at how it affects different aspects of behavior in a cohort of veterans. He works at the Veterans Affairs Hospital there in New Mexico. And he saw that in Gulf War patients, that they actually had a very different microbiome and a whole host of different symptoms that kind of came along with it, even 20 years after Gulf War. So it's really interesting actually looking into the microbiome's potential ongoing cause of these symptoms. And one of the key aspects of Gulf War is kind of a brain fog that at times would be almost crippling to certain veterans. So we were kind of going from a gastroenterology approach, looking at the microbiome and how it can affect the brain and behavior. And that kind of gave me my first taste of this subject, because at the time it was still very small. And at this point, it's becoming a bit more mainstream. There's more papers coming out, at least. But I got really interested in how the gut and the brain can communicate, and what the role of the microbiome was through that. So I was actually reading a lot of papers at that time, and a lot of them were being published here in Ireland. So when I actually finished my master's degree and I decided I wanted to go on and do a PhD, this is just one of the thoughts that was kind of in the back of my mind. I had interviews all around the States to go to different spots, but I talked to John, and he really got me excited about learning more about this specific subject. And I just thought it was really cool and something really interesting to me. So I think there's two kind of broad lessons or takeaway points that could be useful. One, if you find interest in school, a lot of times the best people you could talk to about it would be your professors or people teaching those classes, because a lot of times they can kind of guide you into the right direction of where you can learn more and find something that you could be really interested and passionate about, if research is something that suits you. And yeah, you never know quite where it will take you. It might be across the world, it might be Ireland.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you were drawn by that question well enough to actually explore like a new place. Like that's stuff that's commendable. Like going to another country, yeah, in pursuit of.
It's been exciting.
And yeah, and exciting, definitely. So yeah. And so you mentioned that you were at the end of your PhD. First of all, congratulations. I'm sure
Thank
that
you.
the path was hard, but I'm hoping it sounds like it was worth it. And
Absolutely.
so do you know what your future plans are, or what you would hope to do in the short term?
Yeah. So at the moment, I'm actually working in a postdoc role as I kind of transition from the PhD to the postdoc. And right now I'm actually working on a project looking more into the effects of C-section on the microbiome of, and in this case, in mice, and basically seeing if there are different probiotics that we can use to restore some of the behavior effects of C-section. So it's actually a pretty cool study. It's a large collaborative effort called MIMIC, which is an acronym for Missing Microbes in C-Section, where it starts in the hospital where they get a ton of samples in from either normally born or C-section born infants, and then look at what microbes are there and what microbes aren't there. And then we try to basically restore the ones that aren't to see if we can fix some of the downstream behavioral and immune and XYZ effects. So that's what I'm up to now. In the future, I hope to carry on in this field, and I'll probably be looking to probably explore more of my research interests at another lab at a later stage. Not quite sure where or when that'll be, but that's the tentative efforts.
Very cool. And so it sounds like the research that you're currently going to do is going to characterize different microbiota strains, which I don't think was done in any of the previous works that you had shown us, right? They were kind of classifying the effects of the entire microbiome in general.
Yeah, exactly. So we know where the problems are and we know what they're missing. So now we're trying to show basically that we can fix them through these microbiota-based therapeutics. So for the most part, we're using different combinations of probiotics. A lot of ones that you probably have heard of at one time or another on the backs of like the probiotic pills that you can get even in the stores. But we're dealing with a lot of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium strains and even some Bacteroides, and then combinations of them to see which ones can restore the effects in the host at the best rate.
Very interesting. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of that. Definitely like appreciate your time, appreciate the effort. And I think I was able to learn just like so much from this presentation. So once again, like, thank you, Nate.
Great. Well, I'm very glad to hear that, and you're welcome. If anyone has some questions, feel free to get in touch. I had my email at the start, but it's nathaniel.ritz@ucc.ie. I'd be happy to answer any other questions that anyone might have.
Cool, amazing. So I'll go ahead and stop the recording.
Okay.